Evening, everybody, and welcome to our special broadcast event this evening. My name is Rabbi Daniel Friedman. I am the Senior Rabbi of Hampstead Garden Suburb Synagogue in Northwest London. And tonight, the event is co-hosted by Hampstead Garden Suburb Synagogue and the United Synagogue. Tonight, we are featuring the new book by Natan Sharansky and co-authored by Gil Troy, Never Alone, which is subtitled Prison, Politics, and My People. Now, originally, the name of the book was 999, or perhaps 9994. So, without further ado, let me introduce Natan and Professor Gil Troy, and I will explain some of the background of this interesting title. Welcome, what an honor. Natan Sharansky and Professor Gil Troy, thank you for joining us here in our London broadcast.
Good evening, good evening.
So originally the name of the book was 999. The book represents the three parts of Natan Sharansky's life: 9 years in Soviet prison, 9 years in Israeli politics, and then 9 years in the Jewish Agency. You know, towards the end of the book, the co-authors quipped that maybe there's a further 9, which is the authorship of the book. Thank God it was only in 4, but I believe, as we'll see momentarily, that maybe we are still in the midst of 9.4. Now, I want to draw our viewers' attention once again to the book. We have signed copies available. Please do be in touch with Gail in our office. And as always, thank you to Edward, who is working behind the scenes to make this evening happen. One of the things that's striking about the Natan mentions, you know, often he gets asked to speak to audiences, and it can get a little tiring when you realize the audience doesn't know anything about it. And so, Natan, you insist that people do read a little about the Soviet struggle before. So I want to assure you I have read the book. Gil, and we'll get to this a little later. Gil's book, The Zionist Ideas, that has a foreword by Natan, we will touch on a little later. And while we're at it, might as well mention Gil's book, Moynihan's Moment. Gil, I don't know if you remember, we met many years ago in Vancouver when you presented to Canadian Jewish Federations. Professor Gil Troy is a professor at McGill University, now living in Israel. At the time, I was actually just the +1. My wife, Rabbi Friedman, was the vice president of the Jewish Federation of Edmonton. But thank you. I might mention Professor Troy. I even reference Moynihan's Moment in my PhD dissertation. So thank you. So tonight, though, we begin by discussing Never Alone. And I almost wonder whether, you know, our two authors here, our co-authors, almost are writing in tandem. You know, we open up the Bible and we see Bible stories that are imparting a lesson through morals of narrative. And that to me sounds like Never Alone. Then we have almost the Shulchan Aruch, which details how to be a Zionist. But through Natan's story, I think it becomes very clear how to live the life of a Zionist. And just to quote, Gil quoting A.B. Yeshua right in the beginning, a Zionist is someone who accepts that Israel belongs to the entire Jewish people. And that's something that Natan has lived by, especially throughout your years in Israel. And I want to tease that apart a little more a little later this evening. But when I say that perhaps we're in the 4th section of 9 years, you know, this is not the end of your career. Just this year alone, you were the recipient of the Genesis Prize, the most prestigious prize of our people. And what one does when one receives the Genesis Prize is one has the ability to disperse to various charities. One of those charities is a charity dear to our heart here, Jewish Care in England. Jewish Care, the president of Jewish Care, is a member of Hampstead Suburb Synagogue, Stephen Lewis, and I'd like to invite Stephen into the studio right now.
Hello, Rabbi.
Hi, Stephen. So do you want to, I don't know if you have a few words from Natan before we start?
No, just to say, first of all, it's a privilege and an honor to be with somebody who I feel like has been in my life, all my life, and so nice to sort of see you virtually for the first time. Jewish Care has been through a very difficult time this year. I was actually chairman of Jewish Care for 9 years until about a month or so ago. I've now become the president, and which I think is a mazel tov. But to actually be chairman of an organization like Jewish Care that was on the front line of something that none of us could have envisaged, to have meetings when people are dying in your care homes, clients, people in the community who support your organization, it was a really, really difficult time. And it meant that we had to reach out to a lot of people for additional financial support. And Genesis were one of many that came to the rescue. And I think it showed how much our community, when things are really tough, they come together, they stick together. And I really want to thank Mr. Sharansky on behalf of Jewish Care for the help that he gave us in what we hope the worst is over, but we just don't know until this vaccine appears, which please God it might shortly. Jewish Care is going to have a very tough time, but it was people like you who made a big difference to us over the last few months. So thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you.
Natan, can I ask, why did you choose Jewish Care?
I'll tell you, when I got this prize, and I said that I want to give it to this $1 million to different programs which are helping to people at the times of Corona. But I was discussing it with the heads of Genesis, and they said that it's very important to find projects that even relatively small contribution, $50,000, $70,000, can make a big difference and to reach as many people as possible. And they did quite a good job all over the world, mainly, of course, in Israel, but also looking for Jewish communities in Europe, in America, and of course, in the former Soviet Union. And they proposed me a list of programs which permits to reach many people. I can tell in Israel, it's not only about the traditional Jewish population, but also to Arab population, to prisoners, some prisoners who also need some help, or of course, new immigrants, and also in the other communities, and even in such a relatively rich and successful communities, English, as you know, you have very serious problems. And this program came on the list as one of those which really, with relatively very small sums of money, are reaching a lot of needy people. So I can't say that I knew this program well before, but after the search, which was a real global search, you happen to be one of those programs which we chose, and I'm very glad for opportunity, even in a small way, to help to your community.
I'm not sure if everyone heard me. Thank you, Natan, for that donation, and thank you, Stephen, for stopping in. I know that, Natan, no doubt, our community holds a very special place in your heart, from the days of Avital's activism while you were sitting in prison. And another one of our Hampstead Garden Suburb Synagogue members is an old friend of yours, Rita Ika. Please join us in.
Yeah, well, hello, Rita.
Hi, Natan. It's just a thrill to see you and to speak to you and to know that you and Avital and the girls are all well. It's just wonderful. And thank you, Rabbi, for giving me this opportunity. It's just, you've made my evening.
Rita, tell us the story, or Natan, tell us the story of the connection back in the day. Rita, for our viewers, was the head of the 35s.
It goes back a long way when Avital came to London and we took her to see the Prime Minister, he took her to see various ministers, but she was just a delight to be with, and if you hadn't known about Natan, you knew exactly where Natan was, what he was doing because of Avital. Avital was an amazing young lady when we met her, and she's just grown, and she's just a delightful person. We did many demonstrations with her. We went to Europe with her. The wrong word is perform, but Avital did. If you told Avital of the situation, Avital took care of it. But to work with her, the wrong word is delight, but it was always a pleasure. And to then meet Natan and Avital together when Natan came off the aircraft to freedom, that was an amazing time. One that you can't describe. It was just wonderful. And here it is.
See you, and be healthy, be careful. You are the leader of 35, the most activist group, maybe in all Europe. No doubt that London was extremely important center of our struggle, global struggle, because of people like you or Michael Sherborne, who made 1,000 telephone calls to us in the former Soviet Union. We have mentioned about it in the book. And then the 35, headed by Rita Ecker, was organizing many demonstrations in front of Soviet embassy, and they were on the different concerts of when Soviet belly dancers or others were coming. They were sure that the struggle for our release will be part of these concerts. And of course, they were working with the government, and Avital met a number of times Margaret Thatcher and the other leaders of Britain who were playing very important role. And all this was done by the activists led by Rita. So Rita, it's great to see you.
And you. My love to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you for stopping in. Thank you. All right. I'd like to remind our viewers that we are on Facebook Live, and we do see your comments. If you have any comments or questions, please don't hesitate to post them, and hopefully if time permits, we will get to them and be able to address them to Natan and to Gil. So what I'd like to do, segueing from our meeting up with Rita, I know at one point there was a comment that who were your supporters, the students and the housewives, and certainly Rita represented that second demographic there. You know, later you talk about when you were touring the world and, you know, a hero of our people, Natan, you would get comments like, to quote a couple of comments from the book, "You refuseniks saved my generation from assimilation," because you were a unifying force for the people to campaign on your behalf. Or even the one that you really find amusing, "It was such a great time when you were in prison," because during that time, people were united. We were working together for Soviet Jewry, for the refuseniks. So my question to you, Natan, is how do you inspire youth today? How do you inspire housewives today to get motivated? I think that, you know, sometimes we forget that, you know, a housewife that was motivated, that was inspired, was having an impact on her children without even realizing it. How do we inspire people today?
Well, first of all, it's very important to remember, and we speak a lot about it in our book, that though it seems today that such a monolithic, such a great, powerful Soviet Jewry movement which united everybody, there were many different forces involved and many organizations which were competing with one another, which didn't recognize one another, which were criticizing one another. Just now, so Rita Ecker was the leader of the activists, of housewives, taking from the definition of KGB, who said, who supports you? Only a bunch of students and housewives. But really, it was Jewish students and housewives who defeated Soviet empire then. So the same England, there were some other now, like June Jacobs and others, who were representatives of the establishment, who were very active. And sometimes there were big disagreements. Sometimes establishment organizations were getting orders from Israel not to support my struggle because I'm too close to the dissidents. And then activists were saying, no, we are going to support anyway, and continued. And sometimes they were saying that activists could not even try to do. They didn't have enough resources, and the establishment was taking lead. So, in fact, what was important for me as a spokesman, an official spokesman of our movement, to learn that there are different groups which can disagree between themselves, but which all contribute to the same struggle. And after all, for KGB, we were all one anti-Soviet movement. All these people were on the same, Rita Ekeren, Michael Sherborne, and June Jacobs, and all the others, we were on the same list of my accomplices. And they didn't care who is activist and who is establishment. So what we had really to, at some moment, you understand that it is a big advantage that we have all these competing groups, because that's what helps us to reach very different parts of Jewish people. Those who are interested in struggle for human rights, and those who are interested in struggle for Zionism, and those who are interested to fight against anti-Semitism, and trade union leaders, in the case of labor leaders and conservative party leaders. You can reach all of them. And because in the end, there is something which unites all these Jews. We are united by the desire to continue our journey as one people and fighting and defending one another. And this idea to remember that what unites us is much more important than all of these agreements. That was a very important discovery in the struggle for Soviet Jewry. And that's what we have to remind us today. We are so polarized, and it so often seems that what divides us is much stronger than anything else. And these accusations between some Jews of diaspora and the state of Israel, that this state betrays our Jewish value, or Israeli government says they betray the interests of Jewish state. And we speak a lot about it in the book, that we have to stop even thinking in these terms. We have to think, yes, we are very different. We have some different sets of priorities, but we all want to continue live as Jewish people and to continue this journey. So let's remember what unites us, and then we can find out that we have tremendous power. We really can defeat the most strong dictatorship in the world. We can defeat everybody, but it's really very important to remind ourselves how strong we are. And for this, the parents have to tell to their children about their own achievements. Did the activists of 35, did the children and grandchildren of those activists of 35 know how important their mothers or their grandmothers were in defeating Soviet Union? Gil, you want to add something?
Also is making sure that it's a positive message. You know, we in Israel and my friends and relatives in the United States of America are so impressed now that British Jewry united to fight Jeremy Corbyn. And you were so good at fighting the scourge of anti-Semitism. But one of the emphases that we make in the book is that we can't just be anti-Semites. We can't just be anti-Zionists. It can't just be a negative, reactive, defensive approach. And by the way, it's hard enough to do that because we know, especially in the United States these days, that people can't even agree on the anti-Semitic threat. And the left fights the right-wing anti-Semitism and the right fights the left-wing anti-Semitism, which is why your example was so important. But when we talk about Natan's life, and we talk about the Zionist message, and we talk about the essential message of never alone, that you're a part of this extraordinary people, we talk about this opportunity to celebrate identity and freedom. Not fall into the either or, the false choices of today, where I have to be either a liberal or a nationalist, either a universalist or a particularist. We say no. The Jewish message, the message from Sinai, the message in the Torah, and the message in the Zionist idea is that we are juggling these two different opportunities, and we're being countercultural. You know, I know a few years ago in the UK, you had to have a minister of loneliness because there are so many people who feel so bereft. so cut off. And of course, that's a Western condition. And when we say you're part of this Jewish people, you're never alone. You're part of this amazing network. You're part of these amazing values. You're part of this amazing people, like the 35 who wouldn't let Natan Sharansky be alone.
Let me ask you, I'm going to jump ahead now, Gil, to a question I had for a little later, but it comes off the back of your notion now of balancing or juggling identity and democracy, universalism, particularism. Is this a model that's exclusive to Israel and Jewish people, or is it something that we can model as an Or LaGoyim, as a light into the nations, as a way to balance? I mean, I'll throw something out. So when we were having the Brexit debates, somebody held up Yoram Hazony's book and said, well, this is the proof of Brexit. But maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Is there a way that life can be balanced? On the one hand, we can espouse both of these notions and walk that middle Shvil HaZahav.
Absolutely. I think it's one of the central messages of Judaism, one of the central messages of our book. And certainly if we look at the United States of America right now, people are very much caught in that land of false choices. But the core message of any healthy democracy is that you have to have a strong sense of who you are. There's never been a democracy that was universal, that didn't have borders, that didn't have a strong sense of self, if you will. Just like human beings need a strong sense of self in order to give. Those people who give round the clock of their time, of their money to causes like Jewish Care, they're usually not people who are so open-minded, as my mother warned me, that their brains fall out. They're actually people who have a strong sense of pride. And by having that strong sense of pride, you touch your roots, you touch your identity. This is true in the UK, this is true in the US, this is true in Israel. And through there, you make your contribution to Tikkun Olam. Through there, you make your contribution to the universal. And so, is there an easy formula? No. If I may, quote the great American novelist F. Scott Fitzgerald, he said, the mark of a true intelligence is the ability to hold two competing thoughts in your head. We're afraid of people who are so universalistic that they're not even willing to protect themselves or to have a strong sense, let's say among too many Jews, of defending Israel. But we're also afraid of people who are so particularistic, who are so nationalistic, that they're so busy protecting themselves that they don't think of the other. And so it's a juggling act. And that's the juggling act, as I said, that goes back to the core messages of Israel, of Sinai. And the Zionist message was always that. When I wrote the book, The Zionist Ideas, I looked for a normal Zionist. I looked for someone who said, you know what, we've suffered for thousands of years and all we want to focus on is the Jewish body. Save Jewish lives. And again and again and again, when you read page 2, page 3, page 4 of the manifestos, they inevitably, like a volcano, boom, the ideas come flooding out, come exploding of how to save the world, of how to be good for humanity, how to be an Or LaGoyim, how to be a light unto the nations. And that's natural. And also in most democracies I know, when you actually talk about the real vision of democracy, it's, yes, of course, to make sure that every one of your citizens has freedom, but it's to be a model to others and to help others get to that achievement as well.
I'm going to knock it back to Natan now.
I want to go a step back, because your rabbi asked whether it is Jewish or whether it is universal, this feeling to have both. You have to say, I believe, and we say about it in this book and in my previous books, I mentioned that every person has two basic desires: desire to be free and desire to belong. To be free meaning that nobody will tell me what to think and how to feel, and to belong meaning that there are things which are bigger than my physical survival. There is community, or there is faith, there is group of people, there is civilization that I want to be part of. And that's something very important to remember, that people want, but in the real life, it happens so often that instead of these two desires will support one another, they're fighting against one another. In today's polarized world, there is huge wave of postmodernism which says that for the sake of peace, and freedom, we have to give away identities. Who needs all these nations? Who needs all these religions, which bring so many wars to our life? And this Imagine, which came from London, the John Lennon's song, imagine the world, how good it will be, the world where there will be no borders and no gods and no governments, where will be nothing to die for. And what then they will discover, there is nothing to die for, there is nothing to live for. The life becomes very decadent. And in the last years, we see this great counterattack of nationalism. We want our proud nationalism back. Why we don't want this cosmopolitan feeling of no borders and no nations? And Brexit was part of this desire back to bring back your national pride. And Israel stands in the center of all this. Israel tries to keep, we are in the Middle East. We are part of Middle East, which is all dictatorships, and we are democratic state. And we are part of the free world, and in the free world, national state is not popular. We insist we are Jewish state, Jewish democratic state. And that was our function from the very beginning. We left Egypt and became people. First time we are called people when we left Egypt. And we got our identity on the Sinai Mount. So for thousands of years, we are trying to keep this freedom and identity together. Yes, it is our message. It is our Or L'Goyim, but I think it's something which the world needs to go from these two extremes to make these two feelings to work together, to be proud nationalist and liberal at the same time. By the way, the one who was speaking very powerful about it is the late Rabbi Zaks. And these days we are all mourning this big loss for all the Jewish world. And not only reading him, but speaking to him, participating in many debates, I saw how natural it was for him to be universal person, to think about the challenges of all the world. At the same time, from where all this starts, it starts from your Jewish identity, from your faith, from your family, from your community.
Thank you. I might add just as a tiny postscript that Gil does mention former Chief Rabbi Sachs of blessed memory in the Zionist ideas. And again, I encourage people to, for those who aren't familiar with the book, it is an updated version of the 1959 the Zionist idea, and it takes us through to the 21st century of what it means to be a Zionist from multiple perspectives. Because sometimes today we think it's just one way and not another way, but there are many ways to be Zionist. So Natan, I want to squeeze your idea just a little, if I may. Towards the end of the book, the two of you discuss, 3 9-year stages of your life, Natan, and debate which was the toughest. Was it the time in Soviet prison? Was it the time as a member of Knesset? Or was it the time as the head of the Jewish Agency? And to be frank, and maybe there's something that happens over time, it seems, at least from the tone of your book, that the middle 9 years was in a certain sense psychologically the toughest for you, because, like you say, in the first 9 years in the Gulag, there was black and white. There was good versus evil. You knew you were doing the right thing. You knew it was straight down the line, and there was no wavering. But when you got to democracy and debate, now it became a moment of having to compromise. And you mentioned that many dissidents don't last very long in politics, and Yishar Kochacha that you were able to transition and so successfully master the art of negotiation and politics. But let me ask you, from our previous conversation on a macro level of identity, why does that not translate to a micro level in order to be able to parenthetically, Natan's issue with entering politics was that he felt that he would thereby not be representing the entire nation of Israel. It would be a segment that had elected him. And instead of being a unifying force, now a politician somehow has to almost divide and conquer. And so is there not that notion on a more micro level that in order to be able to promote an idea, one needs to have a certain identity?
Well, it's more complicated than this. Let me start from the conversation, which also is in our book, that in 2009, when Bibi Netanyahu returned back to be the leader of the country, he proposed me to come back to politics, to join him on the list, to be member of Knesset, and later, when I said no, to join the government. And they told to Bibi, no, I was in 4 different governments before, and I twice resigned because I disagreed with some policies. And I was in 4 different prisons, and I never resigned. So probably something is wrong with me being in the politics. And then he said, well, so you really don't want to be in public life anymore? I said, no, but if you will support me as a candidate to be the chairman of Jewish Agency, which just now there must be elections, I think I'm interested in this position. He almost fell from the chair because usually the head of Jewish Agency wants after this to go to Knesset, to be ambassador in Washington, to be the minister. And here he proposed me to be this or this or this. And I said no. And then he said, why? And I said, well, because you are right to deal with Iran as #1 threat. But I think we have also another threat, unity of our people. Shall we, Israel and Jewish people, continue as one people? And that's the place to be and the role to play. So what I want to say that really the easiest time of these 9 years was in prison. Of course, it was very tough, and you can read in my books and other books about the punishment cell, about solitary confinement, about hunger and cold and many other things, and of course, threat of death. But morally, it was such a pure situation. You're there, you feel yourself connected to all the Jews of the world. You understand that all these disagreements that are really meaningless in comparison with this historical struggle. And we have Taryag Mitzvot, Rabbi. Taryag Mitzvot, 613 obligations. Here in prison, you say no to KGB every day, and you fulfilled all your mitzvot. What else you can do for Jewish people? So it is so easy to feel yourself connected with Jewish people, to work for all the Jewish people, to represent all the Jewish people, and to fulfill all your commandments. The moment you go to the free world and special to politics, that's finished. In politics, by definition, miflaga, party, means part of the people. You have to represent those who voted for you. And in fact, I didn't want to go to politics, but there was the need to give a voice to 1 million Soviet Jews who came, and that's how we decided to have this party for a short period of time to help to this Aliyah and to the society. But there you are dealing with the decisions which have to, which influence on everybody, not only on Israelis, also on Jews of the world. And you feel this responsibility, but you cannot really represent all. You have to make compromises and to choose whom you represent. And I have to say, for dissidents who used not to make any compromises, it's more of a difficult situation. They twice resigned, but they felt that I cannot continue making this compromise. I cannot agree with the policy of Barak about dividing Jerusalem. I cannot agree with the policy of Ariel Sharon of disengagement. And that's why you feel that's our limits. In Jewish Agency, I always was dealing with the problems. There could be many headaches with the money, with the budgets, with different organizations, with the Jewish cause. But you never have problems with the programs, with the idea of working for Jewish people. And from this point, of course, the prison was the easiest place. Jewish Agency was a comfortable place. Government was a very tough place. I don't hear. Yeah.
Gil, do you want to comment at all on that?
One of the mysteries, my main job is being an American historian. I also write about Zionism, but I write alone. But I'm also a biographer. And so one of the fascinating things in this collaboration, where we really went over every word together and every idea, was one of the mysteries that struck me was in prison, during the struggle, Natan was Mr. No. He was extraordinarily stubborn. He gave new meanings to the word stubborn. He knew how to out-stubborn the KGB, who had PhDs in stubbornness. And all of a sudden, when he's in government, while indeed he has to be doing all this compromising, he also becomes quite the bridge builder. And one of the extraordinary roles that he played was as a bridge builder, both between Israel and diaspora Jewry all over the world, and also within Israel, often when there were splits over the question of who is a Jew between religious Jews and, well, I hate that word, secular Jews. He was the one who's the bridge builder. And so how does Mr. No, how does someone who's so good at fighting also become a bridge builder? And we talked about it. And one of the things that he said was that you have to know who your target is. When you're with your enemy, when we're fighting Iran, when we're fighting Palestinian terrorists, when we're fighting KGB, absolutely. You draw a red line and you man the ramparts and that's it. There's no negotiation, no compromise. But when we talk about our people, when we talk about that precious thing called the Jewish people, when we talk about the state of Israel, there you try to seek the compromise. There you try to seek Maimonides' golden path. And one of the central themes of the book is the power of dialogue. Not so that we all agree on everything. As Natan was saying about the Soviet Jewish movement, it was actually, everybody was yelling, Shlachat Ani, let my people go. But they came from the right and they came from the left. They came from the religious circles and they came from less religious circles. But we all came together on a common goal. And now the common goal is making sure that we keep the Jewish people going, not just for the sake of momentum, but for these big ideas and these big values. And that requires sometimes to say, okay, let's agree to agree, not just let's agree to disagree. Let's see some things on which we can agree and some things on which we'll continue to disagree. And that became one of the central themes of the second 2/3 of his career.
Continuing with the democracy question, I'm going to take a question here from the audience and then finesse it just slightly. So Malcolm Green asks, having written the case for democracy, what do you feel about what is currently happening to the democratic process in the USA? I'm going to add a little piece of that. I know you speak positively towards the end of the book about new normalization agreements in the Middle East, wonderful miracles happening with the UAE, with Bahrain. These are things that we couldn't have imagined. And you talk about the fact that it's happening on an economic level, business person to be able to make those connections at a civil society level. My question to you is, can you have perestroika without glasnost? I mean, these are not democracies. Just today, we heard in Hong Kong that the Chinese government has clamped down on whether you can be a patriot if you're in the opposition. How are these two interdependent, or are they independent of one another?
Well, thank you, Rabbi. You asked two very important questions, but two different questions. One question is about state of democracy in democratic world, and the other is about dealing with, of democracies with the dictatorships. And so about the first one, yes, we are concerned, both me and Gil, by some developments in the free world. We write about it at the end of the book. We don't write enough because since we wrote the book, there were new developments. But in my book, The Case for Democracy, there is a very clear definition or difference between fair societies and free societies. And what was the difference? We say that if you can go to the public square of your town and say, speak your thoughts, and you're not afraid to be punished by imprisonment or in your life, then you live in free society, which can have many problems, but you feel free to express your views. And if not, then it's fair society. And in fair society, you have this phenomenon of double think, and we write a lot. We write about it. I wrote in the case of democracy, and now we are writing with Gil. Now, the majority of people in dictatorships don't say publicly what they believe in. They don't believe to the official ideology, but they prefer not to speak about it. And then suddenly, in the campuses or in America, and also in Britain, 20 years ago, we started discovering this unique phenomena that some Jews who are saying, we very much want to support Israel, but we know that our professors will not like it. It will be bad for our career. We prefer to be silent. That was the first time when I saw this phenomena. And I thought, my God, it's in Harvard. It's not in Moscow University. What people are afraid of. Since then, it became bigger and bigger phenomena. At this moment, there was a poll of, I think, Cato poll in the United States. 62% of people who were asked on the left and on the right said that they prefer not to express their political views publicly because the atmosphere is so polarized and you don't know how it will be accepted by the people on which your standing in their society depends and so on. Then, of course, you cannot compare it with the threat of being imprisoned in Gulag and KGB, but the very fact that there is phenomenon of double think, that people are afraid for their career if they speak freely their mind, I think it's very alarming, and the leaders of the free world have to think urgently how to overcome this polarization and how to make sure that their citizens, whatever their views are not afraid to speak about it. Now, the second question about relations with dictatorships. I have to say, only today, I had a very interesting Zoom with one of the dissidents from Hong Kong, Jimmy Lai. He is the leader of one of the biggest newspapers there, who is now, in fact, under home arrest. He cannot leave Hong Kong, and he is expecting to be arrested and maybe for years in prison for opposition to Pekin's policy. And his main concern, of course, is to what extent the free world, is ready to link their relation with China with the fate of dissidents. And I think it's a shame for free world that, not like in the case of the Soviet Union, when the fate of the democratic dissidents of the Soviet Union was, the Soviet Jews, of course, was at the top of negotiations. Now this question, even if there is expressed some sympathy, but it's never is linked to any serious international relations. And the last question is about new accords. You know, the one who was against Oslo Agreement, just because it's attempt to use dictatorship to bring, to impose dictatorship on Palestinians in order this dictator will bring us peace. I think that these Abraham Accords, which are signed with non-democratic countries, but it's really a new beginning because we are not imposing these non-democratic regimes. We are not dependent on them. We don't expect them to impose on their people peace with us. It's from bottom up. It's normalization. It's if we have peace with Jordan and not one businessman is ready openly to have business with Israel, not one actor is ready to come to Israel to have a concert because he can be then killed in Jordan. Here, businessmen are standing in line. Here, the actors are learning Hebrew in order to be able to come for the performances. Here, the film studios are already trying to make mutual films. Tourism, everybody is waiting only when Corona will stop. There are already now agreement about 100 flights between Abu Dhabi and Tel Aviv in a week. Every week there will be 100 flights, and the numbers of tourists will be in hundreds of thousands. So that's type of normalization that we need in order to have serious peace agreement with the Arab world. Gil, what do you want?
If I can add, first of all, on the second question, if we wait for every Arab country that's at war with us to turn democratic, we're never going to have peace. And I think, when for years our friends on the left have been calling for peace now, and now we have an opportunity for peace with one country, two countries, three countries, perhaps other countries, we should grab them. And we should say, yes, we hope that the contact with Israel, all these cultural and political and diplomatic ties, will actually have a positive influence on the countries, and we can show them what a democracy is, and we can show them a new model where we don't give up, going back to our earlier theme, our identity. We're certainly not going to say I think, and this has actually been one of the mistakes that Americans sometimes make, they come and say, here's the American model to Muslim countries, to Arab countries which have a proud, strong of identity, follow it. And the Israeli model actually might be a more suitable democratic model, where you're proud of your tradition, you respect minority rights, but you also give, of course, everyone freedom. So that would be my short answer on the second part. On the core question about American democracy, let me say the good news and the bad news. The good news is that last week on Tuesday, democracy worked. We saw an unprecedented number of people going to the polls. The percentages, the voting percentages haven't been so high since 1900. And the number they're estimating by the time they count every single last vote, it'll be 158 million people voting peacefully. And think the day before, the week before, there were already warnings that there was going to be violence, and there wasn't. So I start with that yes, we're very good at pulling our hair out. You see what happened, and feeling like we're in despair. But fundamentally, the country showed much more stability, much more maturity, much more democracy than people gave it credit for. That's the good news. The bad news is that indeed the cancel culture on the left, the totalitarian bullying on the right, the ugly polarization. I mean, we Jews are very good at yelling and screaming at one another and canceling one another out. But now we're seeing in the United States, and I know over Brexit, you also had very ugly moments in democracies. And look, part of the problem is that it's exaggerated by Twitterdom. And I spell Twitterdom D-U-M-B at the end. That we're actually quite foolish in that all we listen to are the shrillest voices in their 280 characters, 140 characters, boom. And I still believe there's a silenced majority out there. I believe there are many more people who are decent, who want to have a balance. So that's my optimistic thing. And one last thought is that, look, underlying the democratic crisis is a moral crisis. And here too, I will echo the late, great former chief rabbi. And I actually first met, I never had the privilege of sitting with him fully, but I first met Rabbi Sachs as Jonathan Sachs, the British theologian, wrote this extraordinary book in 1997 called The Politics of Hope. And he said something very profound, which I constantly quote. He said, freedom is a moral accomplishment. It requires cohesive families. It requires a stable society. It requires to go from the bottom up. And in the same way that Natan was talking about the cancel culture being a crisis of democracy from the bottom up, we don't have dictators telling us to shut up. We have fellow colleagues. We have professors. We have bosses whom we're afraid, and we have Twitter, whom we're afraid that might shame us. And so the cultural challenges of our time, where more and more of us are alone, more and more of us are abandoned, more and more of us are atomized, more and more of us aren't making long-term commitments to one another, more and more of us don't have what we in the Jewish community have, which is community and faith and solidarity. That was always the bedrock of democracy. And so that moral accomplishment of freedom, that moral backbone to freedom is also missing. And in the book, we call for a new kind of connection, again, going back to that core idea of identity and freedom through your identity. And this was Natan Sharansky in the Gulag. This was Nelson Mandela in South Africa. He understood only by being proud of who he was and being connected to his roots could he ultimately fight for freedom. And that, of course, is the Zionist idea and ideas.
So towards the end of the book, you propose a global Jewish council, whereby people would sit at the table and debate ideas from the diaspora, from Israel, be able to shout at one another and not walk out on one another. So a couple of questions. First of all, how does that contrast with the World Zionist Organization that still exists and still does meet? I'm probably not regularly enough, perhaps. And secondly, I mean, how do we get there? I mean, you wrote an article for Mosaic, but Herzl wasn't writing articles. He he brought people together. Does it take a charismatic leader, the likes of Herzl, and is this really 9.4?
Well, we are not trying to compete with Herzl, and definitely we are not trying to now to choose one organization which, whether it is World Zionist Organization or Conference of Presidents of Major American Organizations or any other organization, and to say that is the center, because I know very well that that's the hopeless war. If to start fighting between different organizations, saying this will be the number one organization or that will be number. We are speaking there mainly about the principle, and the World Zionist Organization, of course, it's very good, but can it put itself in the center of the debate between Israel and Jewish people on the topics which were equally important? Knowing the things that are there today, we are not there. And I'll give a very simple example, which we also give in the book. I was minister and member of Knesset, and when, let's say, I'm a minister of industry and trade, and there is some kind of law which has to be passed, which is important for my ministry. So at the hearings in Knesset, at the committees, everybody in Israel who has any connection or any interest in this question will be invited for hearing. If it is representatives of the customers, or the representatives of the businessmen, or the representatives of the trade organizations, whatever, they all will be listed what they think about this law before they bring it to vote. And now a number of important laws only in the last years passed which are important for world Jewry. For example, the law that those who are involved in BDS, boycott movement, will not be permitted to come to Israel. At the moment this law passed with big enthusiasm, so then the problem started. Wait a minute, what about if he's coming on birthrights? And then the explanation that no, it's not like this, and many, many other questions. And I was telling, look, did you members of Knesset invited any representative of Jewish organizations abroad who are fighting BDS every day on the campuses? Did you ask them if this law will help them or to the contrary? Or if such an amendment to this law is necessary? No, but they're those who are fighting with BDS. They're those who know this problem. They are those on whose life it influences, and you didn't even ask them. And that's typical situation. Also, when, let's say, some reform movement of the United States of America is making some decisions which inevitably will bring to conflict with some Israeli organizations, with the terror ministry and so on. Again, I don't say that that the government has to agree with what people think in Harvard, our activists in Harvard, or that reform movement has to agree with what will be decided by chief representative. Of course not. But at least to discuss it, in order that during discussion, before you're making the decision, you will understand better their problems, and they will understand your challenges. And then maybe there'll be 1 millimeter or a very small step to another, but then it will not be felt as something which is against you. Like the so many Jews said, why do you make our life on the campus more difficult by this law which you passed? So that is one example. And then let's say it's imaginary, but it's not so difficult to do with the organizations which exist. Imagine that Knesset, which is there are 3 sessions of Knesset during the year. Before every session, the 120 members of Knesset, or 60, but in proportion to the parties which are represented, are meeting with the same number of the Jews from different organizations from all over the world, also proportional. And here there is the lawyers of the Knesset simply say, here are the laws which will be discussed. And from our opinion, at least these 7 or 10 laws be, or amendments or decisions which will be discussed, they can have some influence on the life of diaspora Jews. And let's have simply discussion to hear their opinions. Also, even such a small step, without giving rights to vote in the Knesset, without changing programs of all these Jewish organizations, but exchanging of the opinion, listening to one another, already can contribute a lot, because we will always agree, stay with our sets of priorities. But if you want, and that's exactly what it's summarizing my experience from 3 different perspectives. We're saying we all want to continue this journey together. There's no doubt. I could check it in prison, I could check it in the government, I could check it representing all Jewry. So if you understand that that's something more important than all our disagreements, we can improve greatly the atmosphere of our discussion. Gil, what do you want to?
If John Locke taught us that the key to democracy is consent of the governed, one of the problems with the diaspora-Israel relationship is that we in the diaspora have the responsibility of the implicated. Israel does something, and all of a sudden we're implicated in it, and we don't feel like we had consent. We didn't even have a voice, and we're not predicting that if we have this global Jewish council, there'll all be unity and unanimity, and everybody will feel good, and we can sing Kumbaya. But we are saying that if you at least felt like you were at the table, if you at least had a chance to make the argument, if you at least had a chance to know that your representatives were expressing your views, then you would have more buy-in. And because ultimately, I mean, obviously, from a religious perspective, there's a chovah, there's a deep commitment, a deep obligation to God. But most of the Jewish community is a voluntary community. We need that sense of buy-in, and that buy-in comes from being at the table and feeling like you're at least heard, even if you're not always listened to.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Natan Sharansky Gil Troy. It's been an honor and a privilege to talk with you this evening. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Natan, for inspiring us for decades. Thank you, Gil, for taking the time to share Natan's story with the world. Obviously, just taking it to a whole new level. And thank you. May you continue to inspire generations to come. Thank you, and have a wonderful and blessed evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi, for all your good work and your reading the book.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, everybody.